Welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm Elizabeth Bennion, Chancellor's Professor of Political Science and Director of Community Engagement at Indiana University, South Bend. Indiana's lawmakers have wrapped up the first half of the 2023 legislative session. Only a quarter of the bills proposed in the State House of Representatives have made it past the midpoint and the Chamber's deadline to actually be considered during the second half of the session. Joining us today to discuss proposed legislation are 5th District Representative Dale DeVon and 21st District Representative Timothy Wesco. Thank you both for being here. Representative Wesco, I want to start with you and ask if there are a couple of bills that you are really working on or focused on heading into this second half of the session.
Well, of course, as you know, this is our budget session, so the budget is certainly the biggest piece of legislation we're dealing with, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through our time today, but a lot of different items. The budget touches just about everything, and so a lot to talk about there. But as the chair on the House Elections Committee, we've been working a lot with the Indiana Election Division on various elections-related bills, and so I've had a number of those bills moving through the process, and that's been really exciting. But I've also had the opportunity to serve for the first time on the Energy and Utilities Committee in the House, and have been learning so much there, and really exciting things coming in the future, but yet a lot of big challenges, and so that's been a really neat new committee assignment for me. And I'm also serving newly appointed to the Natural Resources Committee, so learning about different things regarding there, something I'm very passionate about for our state and natural resources and protecting them. But in relationship to election laws, I have a few bills that we call omnibus bills that have a lot of different provisions. One of those is House Bill 1336, and worked a lot with the Brad King with the Indiana Election Division and the Secretary of State's office, and we really brought everybody together around the table, Republicans and Democrats, said let's work through all of these and make sure we get them all right. And I was really pleased to see that legislation pass out unanimously out of both the House Elections Committee and off the House floor and move over to the Senate. So we're able to bring everybody together, work through the differences, find some good compromises on some different things, and so I was excited about that.
Are there big changes as a result of that, if it passes, that Hoosiers should expect?
So in relationship to that bill, I don't think there's anything in particular. It's just really cleaning up the election code, making changes that reconcile problems that arose or questions that really weren't clearly answered in the code. One of the bills that is probably the most impactful bill is House Bill 1334, and that's a little bit of a more controversial one, and that's in relationship to voter ID. Indiana has voter ID laws now for 20 years, and what House Bill 1334 attempts to do is to bring the requirement, the standard of voter ID to every form of voting. So whether you're voting in person early, whether you're voting in person on election day, whether you're voting applying to vote absentee by mail online, all of which currently require some form of proof of identification, whether a photo ID or a driver's license number or last four social security number, but also make that applicable to applying to vote absentee by mail. So we have House Bill 1334 essentially would require either. It's kind of provide all the options so that it makes it so if you can't do one or the other, whichever you prefer, either a photocopy of your photo ID, but we realize not everybody's going to have a copy machine, so you could just write your driver's license number or the last four of your social security number just to add an extra level of verification that the person requesting the absentee ballot is the person they say they are.
Would this then be included both with the ballot application and with the ballot itself? How does that work?
No, just with the ballot application. And then there is still a signature requirement on the ballot application and on the absentee ballot.
Now, if somebody chose to use the last four of their social security, how would that be later verified? That's just used by the office, so they could pick any of those that wouldn't?
Yes, currently the application form actually has an optional place where you can include the last four of your social security. So we would ask for both the last four of social security and the driver's license number. You only have to include one, but we'd ask for both so that whichever happens to be on your voter registration file, we could most likely make a match there with one of those numbers. So people used to regularly register to vote with the last four of their social security number, but more common, actually, almost universally, it's you use a driver's license number or state issued identification number.
So if the person provided the last four of the SOCH, but it was a driver's license in the file, would then election officials still make that match? You wouldn't necessarily need to know what was on the file, or would it need to match?
If they were able to make a match, if not, then they would reach out to the applicant and explain that they didn't have a number match there and what they needed, and then you would resubmit an application. So there's a curing process there. We want everybody to be able to vote. We just want to make sure it's hard to cheat, easy to vote, that the people voting are the people they say they are.
So it's always balancing access and security there. With energy, I suppose it's the same, wanting to have all kinds of energy options while also working on preserving natural resources and the environment. It sounds like you're doing a lot of balancing in all of these roles.
Of course. There's always a lot of balancing in lawmaking.
Yes. Well, Representative Devon, what about you? Any bills that you're really focused on?
For me, serving as chairman of Family and Children, working with at-risk kids, trying to strengthen families anywhere we can and help a lot of kids that maybe grow up in a dysfunctional family of some sort. And so I work a lot with DCS and FSSA, and 1340 is the DCS agency bill that I carried this year for them. And it does several things. And so technology is changing, right? So as Tim talked about going paperless earlier, it's the same thing. So electronic formats and stuff that we have to change a lot of things. Getting foster care is still a big issue. I love Terry Stigdon, our DCS state director. She has a dream of letting no child age out of foster care. That everybody would come from a loving household of some sort, right, at some point in their life. But so she's got some great programs that we're working with her in allowing foster parents to use them as a tax deduction as well. So that's something that hasn't been around before that we're trying to bring forward. I know our biggest budget item is, children, is K through 12 funding. We've increased that about $2 billion this year. It's one of the biggest ever that we've ever done in the state of Indiana. About $9 billion a year now goes to K-12 funding. And and with that, I know we've got a lot of other, with the special session that we had last year, trying to help mothers and single mothers care for their children, and a great program that we're working on this year that I'm working on, besides the legislation that we're able to put in the budget, is a program called All Pro Dads. And it's Tony Dungy was the coach for the Indianapolis Colts, and has a program down in Florida that they've created tax credits for. We haven't got to the tax credit. We're hoping to work that on the second half, but we've appropriated about $300,000 for All Pro Dad programs to kind of come and partner with philanthropic communities and to help young men learn how to be a father, to be a parent, and through the pregnancy stage all the way through childbirth.
I know you mentioned this special session, and certainly some folks who were concerned about the results of the restrictions on abortion in the state of Indiana asked the question of what will happen to low-income moms. It seems like there are several things that you've been working on in terms of getting the dads legally involved, financially involved, as well as the program you just mentioned to get them more prepared.
Right.
Do you see some of that moving forward, or additional supports for those mothers?
There was quite a bit, actually. We have increased dependent for child exemption. So for first-time parents, $3,000 exemption the first year. Funds, we have a commission to improve the status of children. It increased sexual assault victims assistance up to $4 million. It expanded the from On My Way pre-K from 127% up to 138%. So we're looking at things and issues that might be stumbling blocks for young parents to be able to succeed. We have a whole lot more that we're dealing with, and I know and most of it's educational minded, but it's also working with grants and things to help mothers and their first-time children. So.
And Representative Wesco, I know another thing you were interested in was affordable daycare, other kinds of access to resources. Are we seeing much support in that area?
I know something that I focused on a little bit more of on adoption and costs for adoption and so forth, and we've got a lot of focus and attention on that. So some legislation that's moving in that respect of making adoption more affordable. So that's it's been a few years since I was focused on the daycare thing, since I was chair of the Child Care Summer Study Commission, but that still continues to be a challenge that many people are recognizing and seeking to address.
And you both mentioned education. Of course, that is the biggest ticket item in any budget. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you expect. Do you expect a big increase in the education budget, and what might that look like, Representative Devon?
Sure. So we're going to increase the foundation for grants by 4% to 7%, increases the complexity grant by 1%, increases the special education grants by 5%, increased high value CTE grants by 5%, increases non-English speaking programs per student grants by 23%, adds new incentives for credentials in completion of early literacy, and then invest in operations of funding and partly students in public schools. So we also, one thing that we did many years ago, probably 8 years ago, we brought an adult high school here to South Bend with the Excel Center, overseen by Goodwill Industries, and we're expanding that program across the state now. And so we're just trying to get folks that maybe with the success that we've had here in other Excel centers across the state to open that up to more folks.
Now, with CTE, Career and Technical Education, you also mentioned that complexity grant for schools that may have children with more challenges that are more expensive to educate. You mentioned the Excel Center and that model of helping people who may have trouble finishing their degree actually finish high school, and in some cases get a certificate or some college education as well. I know you're both very supportive of moving toward more opportunities for work-based education. Representative Wesco, could you talk a little bit about what you'd like to see there?
Our number 2 agenda item in the House is House Bill 1002, which would create career scholarship accounts to support apprenticeship and internship opportunities for high school students. This is something I'm really passionate about, having been able to be a part of a family business where I had that opportunity to be in a real workplace environment, gain some great skills in my grandfather's piano factory, and I think it's just a really great opportunity when students can really get out into a workforce situation and develop some great skills. So that's something that we're really going to be putting more resources to and providing resources for those apprenticeships and for those careers. There's some great careers out there for students that we have to educate them about and get them engaged with earlier so that they can really go out and have a great future for themselves and their families and provide these needed positions for our community.
We had a couple of superintendents from South Bend and also Penn Harris on, and they suggested that they would like to see career programs run through their schools rather than having money follow the students to individual workplaces. I wonder what your response is there and how to balance that.
I think the career work that a lot of our schools do, the Career Academy, the Career Center in Elkhart is a great example of a great career focused where they're really getting some good skill sets. But I think we can expand upon that, grow it to industries beyond what a school is capable of having opportunities in, to represent the entire local economy and businesses in a way that one corporation could never meet all of those unique opportunities. And so I think it's not an either or, I think it's a both and. I really appreciate the career focused opportunities that students have in our career centers and want those to continue.
Now, it sounds like what you want is choice for the children as well as for their parents. Representative Devon, another proposal is to expand the school choice voucher program to include more people and open that up. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and what you think will happen, why you think it's important.
Sure, and I know vouchers sometimes can be a touchy subject with some folks, and others it's it's a way out of a a situation that they may not have ever had before. So I think, you know, the more we give people choices and outcomes for kids, we've changed from more college ready to career ready, and, you know, to do both. So the career pathways, we've got several programs through career pathways that I think are really critical. I think the vouchers allow more kids to have more choices in their future and trying to succeed in life regardless of what direction they're going. And I think, you know, we're excited. I know Chuck Goodrich is a legislator from Noblesville, and he has a robotics grant that he was successful in. Actually, last weekend I got invited over to Penn High School. They had, I think, 34 schools come from northern Indiana, lower Michigan to compete, and they're creating about I think it's a $15 million grant to expand on the robotics and getting kids more involved in engineering. And, you know, the Legos are such, my grandkids love Legos, right? And I could see some of those kids in opening up avenues. But vouchers, some schools don't have those type of programs where sometimes these vouchers can expand kids to go to and be involved in other programs like the robotics and different things that they're doing.
Representative Wesco, some of the Senate Republicans have said maybe we need more guardrails, we need to watch our price tag, that it may not be time to do this now. What would you say to those folks, and what do you think will happen out of those negotiations?
I have no idea. No, it's an interesting thing. Of course, Republicans are in the majority in both the House and Senate, but there's still very different ideas and philosophies and people that come from different parts of the state, and that's good. It's a good check and balance thing for us, and I think that there is going to be a growth in opportunities for families to have choice scholarships and send their families. What it's going to look like at the end of the day, and it's anybody's guess. There's certainly some hesitation on some parts, but you know, there's going to be issues here or there in this school, that school. All schools face some issues from time to time, and I think you need to be really careful about taking one situation where there's a problem in this school, we need to put the brakes on in the whole state. That you need to be careful about that, because just taking one situation in one place and making that, generalizing it as though it's a common thing across the state, I don't think is fair.
You may be referring to one of our local senators, Senator Mishler, and his recent writings about one particular school and telling people to be careful, and also making him have some reservations about the program as a whole. Folks can look that up, or we can have Senator Mishler on to share his point of view on that. Representative Devon, you mentioned for some people it's a way out of a difficult situation. Some folks, particularly critics of school choice scholarships, say, you know, it was designed for poor people to have more choices to get out of a failing school system, but now it's used mostly by middle class and potentially upper middle class people who would have paid on their own. They don't deserve or shouldn't be given taxpayer money. How do you respond to that? Is it just the idea that it's their money, they should have the choice?
Right, you know, my first bill that I ever drafted was letting the money follow the child. So, you know, and so taxpayers, right, all pay into a tax base. I think our ADM is up to about $8,000 to $9,000 per child now. When I came in 10 years ago, it was about $4,500, so it's about doubled what people pay into the ADM for a school gets for a child coming to their school. And so should that tax dollars that a parent pays, would it allow them to have their child go where it's chosen based on where their district is or not? So, you know, I think we're just trying to get education where we can eliminate the dropout rates, right, where everybody has an ability to get educated in some type of form or fashion to where they can succeed in life.
Now, one of the issues that comes up and seems to be mentioned, and it certainly draws at least as much public attention often as education, but never really quite seemed to go anywhere legislatively, is this issue of marijuana. We get lots of questions about it and whether Indiana will change its policies to be more similar to Michigan. It doesn't look like there are going to be any changes this session.
No, none of the bills are moving this session, and it's something I think you need to be really careful about.
And I know the Chief Justice Rush had a symposium this past summer dealing with mental health. there was over 1,000 people from all 92 counties and a lot of that discussion was, marijuana and drug abuse and different types of addictions that might be out there, and how the mental health industry is getting a whole lot more attention now than it ever has in the past. And it's something that we need to, if the brain is being developed up until it's 25 years old, what do those drugs do? And, how do we deal with that? And we want to help everybody succeed in life, right? So,
mental health care was a big item for the governor when he was talking about what he would like to see. It looks like we may be having some bills to try to provide more support for people seeking mental health services, and also to make sure people in crisis don't end up in a jail where they won't get the help that they need. Could either of you talk a little bit about what you expect in that area?
I know our law enforcement, it's critical that a lot of times when somebody's acting up with a mental issue, and they tend to create some chaos in an area, maybe even a crime, but they're being affected by their mental health abilities or disabilities that might be there, and sometimes we lock them up, right? And so we're really not getting them help. We're just protecting the public, but we're really not giving the folks help. So we're really trying to put a lot of funding towards mental health issues. I know even for our law enforcement, there are about 200 statewide law enforcement short. We're increasing the starting salary for state policemen up to $70,000 starting salary for those police, to try to entice more people to get involved in that issue. And I know mental health, though, is a critical in how officers are trained to treat people and how to respect and to, so a lot of training is going towards that, to identify when people are dealing with mental health issues.
Mental health is the focus of House Bill 1006, one of our agenda bills in the House, which would just enable law enforcement to practice a compassionately, be able to take people that are having a mental health crisis, rather than take them to jail, allow them to take them to a facility where they can get the help for whatever they're going through, and keep them in that facility a longer period of time, or extending the period of time, adding some flexibility there. So rather than just taking the approach of, here we've got somebody acting out, we know it's a mental health reaction, we're going to throw them in jail, instead allow for them to get the help that they need.
I know we've had some folks from Faith in Indiana on, and they have suggested that it's not law enforcement who should be responding in these situations, but instead somebody trained as a mental health professional. Is this an either or, is this another both and, having a separate line that people would call for someone like that, but also having more training for law enforcement?
You can't ignore the fact that people are sometimes legitimately dangerous, a threat to themselves or to other people. And so I think law enforcement oftentimes has to be involved. Now, where someone's not an actual imminent threat to themselves or to someone else, maybe in that situation you can have a non-law enforcement entity, but then right. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh yeah, there's somebody, and we've had a real tragedy here in South Bend with an individual going through a mental health situation, and so just it's difficult. It's difficult out in the field sometimes knowing when someone is a threat, or genuine threat to themselves or others, or not, and so it's difficult.
So this is one reason you'd like to see more training, so that if it is law enforcement who responds, they're able to assess.
It's like teachers. A lot of times, they're raising a lot of these kids in the classroom, and law enforcement, we need to identify when it's a crime or when it's somebody's crying out for help, right? And so even at the State House 2 weeks ago, we had a guy on the ledge, that he held officers up for about 3 or 4 hours out there on the outside of the State House, and was having a mental issue, right? But they treated it with kid gloves and they talked him down, and but I'm not sure how it turned out, but it ended up good.
The reality is law enforcement are dealing with people struggling with mental health issues every day.
Is there more money in the budget for both inpatient and outpatient treatment for folks with mental health? Is that a plan?
That was the key, so that these mental health facilities could be geared up for more, and it's hard, right? So every industry is struggling. Teachers are struggling to find new teachers. Policemen are having trouble, in the building industry that I work in, we're having trouble finding, still carpenters and people to get engaged. And in the health industry, it's no different. We need to get people, good people that are trained and equipped to deal with some of the circumstances, because I think our problems are going to get worse before they get better. You know, I was in a conference this year that dealt with homeless youth, and right now in the United States we have 4.2 homeless youth.
4.2 million.
4.2 million, and thank you. And that number is growing by the day. And so I think, and when you don't have adults and parents in people's lives or caring people, then there's a lot of trouble. And drugs and addictions. And
many, many issues to tackle, and I know you're tackling them and working with these complex issues every day. We thank you for being on. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Politically Speaking. I want to thank my guests, Representative Dale Devon and Representative Timothy Wesco of the Indiana House of Representatives. A democratic republic is a representative democracy, and we at Politically Speaking appreciate our elected officials for keeping us up to date on what's happening in Indianapolis. I'm Elizabeth Bennion, reminding you that it takes all of us to make democracy work. We'll see you next time.
This WNIT local production has been made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.